Guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Justin Davis, and now this is our 10th year on YouTube, our 10-year anniversary of Drone Camps RC. And today I thought, well, this would be a great day to make a updated version of our 2024 beginner things that I wish I knew when I was starting out. So we're going to talk about 20 different things that are going to help you if you're brand new to FPV, whether it's setting up a drone, building, flying it for the first time, or just general things about connecting the quad to Betaflight. Things like that you're going to learn in this video that will save you a ton of time, and things that I wish I knew when I was first getting started in FPV. One of the first problems that most people encounter when they're trying to set up and properly set up their drone with Betaflight Configurator, this is the problem. People go to GitHub and they can't figure out where to download the file from. There's so many different links here and it all looks confusing. If you get at the very top of the page, what you want to do is Google Betaflight Configurator, and when you do that, you're going to come to a variety of options. Don't go to the website itself, betaflight.com. Just click on the one above it that says Releases, Betaflight Configurator here, and when you go to that page, scroll down to the first candidate that's at the top of the page right here. This says Release 10.10.0, Release Candidate 2, and you're going to keep scrolling down. You'll see fixes, all these different links here. Don't pay attention to any of that. Contributors, and right underneath contributors, you usually want to see a little tiny kind of a check right here next to assets, and it says there's 9 assets. That's where the links are to the configurator downloads. So this is going to save you a ton of time. If you click that, it's going to reveal the DMGs as well as the zip files and the APKs there for the full revisions of these. So what you want to do is find your operating system, whether it's Windows 64, Linux 64, or Mac OS. So I see Mac OS DMG right here. I'm going to click on that. I'm going to download that to my desktop, and I'm going to open that up. I'm going to install it on my Mac configuration, and then I'm going to be able to use Betaflight properly. If you're on Windows, you may need to go ahead and download some drivers as well and install those on your system, restart your computer, and we'll talk about the next thing that you might encounter using Betaflight for the first time in tip number 2. Now, a very common problem that a lot of people have after they get Betaflight installed on their computer is they just can't connect to their flight controller and get the quad to load up inside Betaflight. This is such an easy fix, and what you really need to do at this point, after you've, if you're on a PC, you've installed your drivers, Betaflight Configurator is installed, you restarted your computer. If you're on a Mac, you don't have to worry about drivers. You just need to copy the application over to the applications folder. There are 2 types of cables out there in USB land. There's actually a ton of different types, but even though these 2 look exactly the same, they're both white, they're both USB-C, one of these is not a data cable. You need to make sure that the cable that you're using to plug your quad into Betaflight is indeed a data cable. It shares information backwards and forwards here, and it allows you to write down to the flight controller as well as connect to Betaflight. So if you don't have a data cable, you're not going to be able to plug in your quad to Betaflight and get it to open up. What I recommend doing is auto connect so that it automatically loads up just like that and ready to go inside Betaflight. Now, another common problem is that people say that their quad drifts one way or drifts the other. One of my biggest advices to you is not to do any trim on your radio. This comes from the RC airplane world, where people think that they have an elevator or an aileron that's off on one side, and instead of mechanically trimming it, they'll just use the servo trim and trim the servo one way or the other. We don't have servos on quads, so what you need to do in here is to make sure everything is nice and level. Sometimes even from the factory, things will not be level on this screen. So if you see that your quad is off axis right here, it looks a little strange. If you want to check the orientation, flip it around toward you, have your rear of the quad facing you this direction, and then go ahead and hit reset Z axis, and that will allow you to make sure that left is left and right is right, front and back. That all looks good there. We're going to set it flat back on the bench, and it looks like it's a little bit off right now. On one side, it's not completely flat. So how you're going to help your flight controller fly better and not kind of lean or fly to one side with you kind of making up for that with the stick, you're going to press calibrate accelerometer. It's going to calibrate for a second. Now you're going to see that quad go back to level after, say, about 5 seconds. And now when your quad flies for the first time, it should fly much better and not lean to one side or the other. Now, one of the best tips that I can give you as well is make sure that when you're working on your quad indoors, whenever it's on the bench, whenever you need to power something up and check something, you want to always make sure that you have your propellers off the quad. I have actually cut the tip of my finger off before, my pinky finger, and it was not fun. I had to go to the ER, and they weren't able to stitch it up because it was so macerated. They had to actually put like battlefield glue on the end of it, aka super glue, and make sure that that was closed off and the bleeding would stop. So most important tip in the hobby, in the FPV hobby, and any RC hobby that involves propellers, is always take off the propellers when you're working on things. Even inside Betaflight, if it's just a flight controller change or a mode change, sometimes the arm switch can happen on the bench and cause big problems. Now, Betaflight does have some safeguards in it that will not allow the motors to arm until you check a button. But even checked, sometimes I've cut my finger or had an accident or had a quad fly across the bench or try to hit me in the face. So there's a lot of things that could go wrong with the props on indoors. So I always used to say, little Johnny, take off your props indoors. Now, I'm glad you're still with us at this point, because this is also a huge thing that may save you a huge problem when you buy your brand new quad. Now, if you just bought a quad, you're about to take it outside and fly it, you went through all the steps to set it up, make sure that the motors are going the right direction, and everything looks perfect. You're ready to go outside and maiden flight your quad. Like RC helis, these quads need a little bit of physical maintenance every once in a while, and it's always a good idea, especially before your first flight, to go ahead and take a driver and go around the whole quad. I always start with the motors first, and you want to just give each bolt a little bit of a slight turn. Make sure that everything on your brand new drone is nice and snug, and I'm talking about all of the bolts on the quad. Just thoroughly check every single bolt on the quad, and that way everything will be nice and tight. And it's a good idea to just go over your quad, I'd say every 5 flights or so, and frame bolts, motor bolts, top and bottom plates, as well as all the arms. Make sure that all the bolts are nice and snug, because over time they can loosen up, and if a motor flies off, that will definitely cause a crash. So you always want to have nice and tight hardware on your quad. Okay, so some tips on checking motor direction. This is super important, because if you did your first build, you need to check the motor direction, and there's a couple easy ways to do that. You can check it inside Betaflight over here on the computer, or you can do it manually. There's also a couple of different ways to do it manually, and I'm going to share those with you in this tip. What you're going to do is take a little bit of piece of painter's tape and put it on the top, and you're going to create like a little bit of a flag off the top of the motor post. Turn on your radio, plug in your battery, gently arm the quad, and disarm the quad. So you're going to basically flick the arm switch on and off, and that'll spin up the motors enough in air mode that you just get a little bit of motor turn, and it should show you which way your motors are turning. So I believe this one was set up with props out configuration. I could be wrong, but I think it is props out. So I'm going to start with the right rear motor. And sometimes we, in a typical quad configuration, we call that right turn rear, so it's turning to the right. But this little propeller right here is a bored out 3-inch propeller, and we just made this a little bit wider so that this will freely spin. And this is the second technique that you can do, is you could take a smaller prop, a little tiny, say 3-inch, if you're working on a 5-inch, obviously, much smaller prop. But I don't put a nut on top of it. I just want to let it free spin. So that way when I plug in the quad and I arm it, it's not going to fly off the bench. The worst that's going to happen is this little guy is going to get airborne, which it has in the past on me. But this is a really easy way to check the direction of that motor. So then I know, see, I just barely arm it. And you can see that this one is indeed moving to the left. It didn't even fly off the post that time, which was great. So I'm just barely arming it, and you're gonna, if you're on a switch, you're just gonna flip the switch, but on this, it's actually a big push button. But just barely arming it shows me that direction. That is a props out configuration. So now I can move this over to the next motor, and I can see which way that motor is going as well. So that one's going to the right, that one's going to the left. Now you can also check motor direction inside Betaflight. That's pretty easy to do. We're just going to plug in the quad battery. we're going to plug in a USB cable, and then we're going to go down to motors. And this is great because it shows you the information that we just basically confirmed ourselves with the radio and a battery and a little tiny 3-inch prop or a piece of painter's tape. So that's now showing me that that is definitely, indeed, I was right. The motors are reversed, which is a prop out configuration. According to the front of the quad, props out, and sort of in on the back. So if we want to change motor direction, we can do that here, but we can also test individual motors or all of them at once. So I want to test motor number 3 back here. They are always in order as follows. They are usually 1, 2, 3, and 4, and sometimes that can change. You can also change that configuration as well in Betaflight, which is super nice and convenient now, not having to rewire things, or if your build is a little wonky, you can fix that. So what you do is you're going to check this little button down here that says I understand the risks. Once you do that, you're able to check motor number 3. So this is the third one over, motor number 3, and we're just going to gently bring that up, give it a little bit of power, and now we see that that one is indeed, number 3 is moving to the right. If I just grab that, gently bring it up and back down, and I can see my little propeller moving around. Now I know that's going to the right with a little testing inside Betaflight. Now you're looking at the Geprc LR8. This is the Mark IV LR8. It's an 8-inch long-range drone. And someone asked me the other day, like, what happened? What do I do? One of my motors is turning the wrong direction. And this is like a 3D printed build that a guy was working on. And I said, well, there's an old school way that you can fix that if you want to reverse motor direction without having to go into, say, BL Heli or BL Heli 32 or mess around inside Betaflight. If you want to physically do that, what you can do is, if you've built this quad yourself, you can swap 2 of the wires here with your soldering iron, and if you swap 2 of these wires, it will change the motor direction on the quad. Now, a tip for the analog guys: if you have a drone that has tons of static, and when you fly 20 feet or 30 feet away, you're having a lot of static in your goggles, and you've done everything you think you possibly can to try to figure out what is going on with your video signal, you know, you made sure you're not on 25 milliwatt, you're cranking full power. I know people have these 2.5 watt VTXs now, and talked to someone recently that said, oh, I'm having such trouble, I'm getting so many lines of interference. It could be environmental, it could be something also RF in the air, maybe you're in an urban population, maybe there's Wi-Fi, there's tons of reasons, but a very simple reason that sometimes this happens is that this video signal wire coming off of the VTX is running too close to your power line. So right here you can see where these wires come up right here. This is the yellow cable, here is the signal wire coming up from the VTX. And mine actually does happen to be coming straight by this power line, right straight to the flight controller coming off the battery. So if you move that video signal as far away from, just maybe run it underneath the VTX away from the power source to the battery, you're going to get a much cleaner signal back to your goggles. There's going to be way less interference. Now, one of the things that people have the most problem with nowadays is binding up and getting the radio to bind up with an ELRS receiver. So ELRS radio to ELRS receiver, sometimes it's just not happening. Do I have the right receiver for my radio? You need to check out the radio version for the module, internal module or external module. The next thing you need to do is make sure you have the right version of receiver firmware as well. And the easiest, quickest way to do that is with the Radio Master USB updater. They now have this pack that you can get. I'll put a link down below to this one as well. This one is pretty great. You can put these four pins down and it will initiate the firmware update once you have the file downloaded. Now, the quick way to bind, if you don't know it, and sometimes you just get lucky when you plug in your quad 3 times, it puts your quad into bind mode. So plug it in 3 times, you will see that the receiver starts to flash, and then you can hit bind on your radio, and 9 times out of 10, it will bind up. Now, one of the things we get questions about a lot from people is, where should I mount my antenna? What type of antenna should I get? Should I get regular or should I get diversity style antennas, and how do I mount those? So I'm going to tell you what's been my best experience in flying long range and really having the best penetration and not receiving signal loss, where to put the antenna on the quad. Now, a lot of manufacturers for many years had put them on the back, and they supply this extra TPU connector back here for the Immortal T to go across this direction. That keeps it on the horizontal. If you're flying in this direction, you also want it the same on your radio to match. So your antenna should be horizontal and not facing vertical. So if you face this vertical, say you face it up and down, like some people do this direction, up and down, you also want to have your antenna on your radio up and down to match. So vertical, vertical, horizontal to horizontal. But this placement is not very optimal because sometimes when you're flying back direction toward yourself, you can see that this antenna is kind of blocked from the front. And when you're flying away from yourself, the rear is totally exposed line of sight wise. You have a perfect connection to this antenna back from your radio. When you turn around, come back the other way, you do have some blockage on a lot of different angles, almost complete blockage when I come down to level. But on this front mount type situation, I've talked about this before on the channel, when you pivot and rotate to turn around, say you're coming towards yourself, everything is fine, you can see it's up in the front here. When I turn around this direction, going away from me, still I'm not blocking it. Coming back, totally fine, and going away, totally fine. Total exposure, any axis that I turn. Right about there, we kind of get some line of sight loss right there. But that's about the only spot, and I've never had a fail-safe with it mounted across the front like this, and I'm starting to mount them across the front of my quads more and more, and getting away from that rear mount type of setup. Now, if you want to mount, say, a diversity type receiver, you can do that. TBS has them, ELRS has them. This is the new ELRS receiver from Radio Master. This is a great one. It is true diversity. You can mount one on the vertical and one on the horizontal. So bring one facing up and then bring one facing across on your quad. And sometimes it's good to try to get them a little bit of separation. So spread them apart as far as you can, and that'll give you the most coverage on both of the axes in the spectrum. Now, our next tip for beginners is LiPo battery charging. The most important thing I can tell you about LiPo battery charging is do not leave your battery charging by itself. Don't leave the room that you're charging it in. Don't get in your car and drive down the street to go get a drink or anything. Don't leave your house and come back and just hope that this is finished later. Sometimes I've had friends who had these explode on the bench. They can cause a fire in your shop. They can burn down your house. I know I have friends that have had, entire lifetimes of all their RC airplane stuff, their four-wheelers, their truck. I had one guy had his burnt down his garage. I've had other people lose their entire house. So be very careful when charging your LiPos. Another big tip, aside from never leaving it unattended, is to walk by it every once in a while. Just put your hand on it and feel it. Feel it with your hand. And just feel if it feels hot. If you have a hot LiPo on a charger, it means that that battery is on its way to probably igniting at some point. Now, the other thing you can look out for when you're charging a LiPo, you will, if you breach one of these cells, if one of these cells pops at any time, that means it got so hot, it sprung a leak somewhere, and once air hits these, fire is next. So sometimes you have about 15 to 30 seconds to get this outside before it ignites. I have literally carried these in my hand and thrown them out the front door and have them explode on the ground in front of me. So what you will hear, sometimes you will hear this, if you don't have music playing or the TV playing, you actually hear a nice low fizz. And that is air escaping from one of the cells because everything in there is heated up and gas is escaping. So if you hear that, disconnect it at once, take it outside, whether it's hot or not. If you hear that fizz and you kind of smell something as well, smoke will come next and then fire. So very important that you look out for that. There's a fizz and that type of noise, you'll hear that. The next thing you need to make sure you have is a chemical rated type of fire extinguisher. This fire extinguisher needs to be able to put out a type of chemical fire for LiPos. So if you go get just a regular fire extinguisher, that might work, but you want to make sure that it's a chemical rated fire extinguisher. Very important to have that, and keep that fire extinguisher on the opposite side of the room that you're charging LiPos in so you can get to it. So now you're at the point where you're ready to maiden flight your first quad. Maybe you built it, maybe it's a bind and fly. Everything looks perfect. You have your batteries all charged up, you've got your goggles bound, you've got your propellers on and your radio's charged, you have it on the model, and you're about to go outside and fly it. Now, what's the first thing you should do when you go outside and fly it? Should you go ahead and goggle up, put your goggles on, and fly your quad for the first time in FPV? Maybe you've already flown a trainer drone and you're ready for your first 5-inch experience. Not exactly. So when you go out to fly for the first time, your first 5-inch, say you've already flown everything else, you're ready to go with this one, what you really need to do is you need to stand behind it, get about 10 feet, 15 feet behind it, give yourself some space, and keep it in angle mode, and that's stability mode. So it will have stability, but what you need to do first is line of sight fly it. Bring it up off the ground to make sure that it hovers, and then just simply bring it back down and land it. And you know, what I do is every single day I get new drones here on the channel all the time. So what I do is I test hover it, I make sure it goes forward, back, left, right. All my axes are good, propellers, everything is good, motor direction's good. So that's what you're testing on that first initial flight. Doing it line of sight, it just lets you know while you're not goggled up that things are not going to go wrong. So everything is good. Once everything is good from a line of sight flight test, I will go ahead and I will goggle up, and then I will fly it after that. Now, things that can go wrong, let's talk about that. Now, things that can go wrong on your maiden flight, 9 times out of 10, it has to do with 2 things: motor direction, or you have the wrong prop on the wrong motor. And this even happens to me still years later. These propellers, they all kind of look different when they're all in a pile like this. So when you're putting them on, it's very important to pay attention to which direction of travel you're putting them on, and that it's on the right motor. If even one of these is on the wrong motor, what's going to happen when you go to fly your quad for the first time? It's going to flip across the ground. It could even, you know, I've almost had one hit my side of my Prius. It flew at my car and went under the car and out the other side. And it happened with, I mean, a split second, boom. And the reason that it goes so crazy and it happens so violently is because there's an odd external force that the flight controller is not ready for. And when there is a prop on wrong, it's an extreme amount of force. So what happens is it causes flight controller freak out. And then the quad also utilizes that mechanical wrong thrust, and it initiates a roll. So that's what happens. We have over compensation for the flight controller and physical reaction from the motor as well. Those 2 combinations are pretty deadly. So you want to be careful there for your maiden flight to make sure that everything is flown line of sight first before you goggle up. Now, another question that we get on the channel a lot is, which 5-inch drone should I buy first? There's so many out there. Some of the crowd favorites are like the Geprc Mark V. People absolutely love that one. There's also the iFlight Nazgul Evoke. This is the F5 series. This is the dead cat version with the straighter arms in the front, so you get no props in the view of the GoPro or the O3 camera. I like the Nazgul Evoke F5, which I have sitting here. This is again the dead cat DC version. I love that one. Has the O3 on there, and it's my go-to freestyle quad for just kind of daily flying. And this is the one I flew through a pizza, and it survived. I crashed it all over the ground for a, you know, just kind of a food versus drone type of episode that we did, and it was super fun, and it survived. And I gotta say, like, there's still pizza sauce on this, and we talked about that before. It is a very tough drone, and it's great for beginners, but most importantly, it's durable as hell and it flies great. And you can also add GPS on this one if you want to have return to home on this one. So that's, you want to put M10 GPS on this one. It's the brand new M10 GPSs that came out late last year. So in 2024, still my number 1 pick is the Nazgul Evoke F5, hands down, over some of the other quads out there in the 5-inch bind and fly category. Now, my radio of choice as well in 2023 and still to this day is Radio Master Boxer. I have the Max edition there. That one's probably around $250 with all the anodized aluminum on here. You can get all the different color upgrades on this one if you want: red, green, blue, and yellow, or gold. I happen to like the gold one. I think that one looks great, and this one works with ELRS or TBS Crossfire. So I run a diamond antenna on the very top with my Crossfire in the back, and I can also run ELRS, which is built in internally. So it's probably the hands down one of the best radios out there. You can also get one that's quite a bit cheaper, around $99 for a Boxer. So mid-size radio, great size, not as big as my TX16S, which now sits in the box a lot more now that I have a Boxer. Now we're going to get into some goggles tips right now, and if you are brand new to FPV, I wish someone had told me this when I first started. My first pair of goggles I took out to the field. I was with a friend. I was actually flying an RC airplane with some FPV gear that we strapped on it, and I set my goggles down on the bench, and I actually had them kind of facing toward the sunlight. What I didn't realize was that the glare from the sun through these magnifying glasses right here that magnify the screen, it burnt a spot onto the lens. So whenever you're using FPV goggles, one of the most important things, the most important tips I can tell you is to not leave them facing the sun. Make sure you have them sitting down toward the bench like this, or just inside the case. I like to use the Crown Royal bag because for these old goggles that I have, both the 030s here from SkyZone years ago, these are some analog goggles. These work great for those, and it also keeps them out of the sunlight, which is great. And these goggles now, wow, they're like, I think they're like 6 years old now and still rocking inside the Crown Royal bag. But the same goes for DJI goggles. Don't leave them out in the sun to possibly burn a permanent spot on your screen or completely mess up your screens. Now this one is going to be a tip, but it's going to be based on my opinion, okay? A lot of people ask me, which digital system should I get, or should I fly analog, or should I fly digital? Now there are several different popular digital systems out there that you can get. You can get DJI system, you can buy the DJI goggles 2, maybe there's goggles 3 coming out soon, hopefully. I have the goggles 2 here, they're great. I don't have to hook them up to my phone. According to some people that say they have to hook them up to the phone, I don't have to with the DJI 03s, maybe with the Avata, but with the analog goggles, you simply plug it in, don't need any firmware updates, and they just work. But they look kind of like old school VHS, and there's a little bit of snow on the screen. And some people don't even know what that is. They ask us sometimes, what's that snow on the screen that I saw? Well, that's analog video. You can also choose to fly HD0 or walk snail. This is a pair of walk snail goggles in the back here. This one still has some sort of digital looking snow on the screen, and DJI goggles have kind of a blurring, almost like a pixelization type thing, but you can kind of turn on and off that type of thing as far as the way it kind of moves it to the side or brings it in. And I'm not a fan of doing that. I like to turn that feature off so that I just have it across the screen, because it seems to fly better and it's less distracting by putting all those blurred pixels on the side. So that's one thing to think about there, but my choice is still going to be DJI as far as HD FPV, my choice for 2024. Now there are several ways you can safely store LiPos indoors in your garage or in your house to give you a little bit of a safeguard from fire. Now the number one choice for many people for many years, and this comes from the RC airplane crowd, 20-30 years ago, guys were using these, and I was one of the first drone channels to talk about this using ammo tins. Now you want to make sure that you don't have this closed all the way without having some type of ventilation at some point where you can have air escape. If something catches on fire inside there, you don't want to create a bomb, but you want to have a little bit of air escape so that you don't have a tight locked situation. Very important that it's not airtight. The next thing that you can do is you can also use any type of LiPo safe. Try not to overload it like this bag is, but using a LiPo pouch is also kind of nice for transporting LiPos, say to and from your house to the field and back. So this is what I use for carrying LiPos in my car. These also work great when you go through TSA. as long as you're not carrying like this many. If you're carrying kind of a handful of batteries, a lot of times you're not going to get pulled over in the TSA. And if you do have them inside a pouch, and they're also labeled, it's not like a homemade battery that you've made yourself. As long as it has a label that tells them what size it is, and that it's not over, like, I think it's like over 100 watt hour, something like that, you won't get pulled over or have your batteries seized at the gate. So pretty important for air travel that you do that. Now, if you're one of the lucky people who own grips on the side of your radio, then congratulations. I happen to be one of those people, but I also know people that take a little bit of skateboard grip tape and they will put around the side of the radio. They also made pre-cut ones as well that you can get for your radio that will go right on that radio that you have. So you can look these up on the internet. It does make it a lot more comfortable in the hands to just kind of not have something slip around slide. So some of the plastic that they use in the manufacturing process can be quite slippery. So the worst thing in the world is dropping your radio. But if you just go to your local skate shop and you get a little bit of maybe some free grip tape, like I got this roll for free. They just didn't want it. Maybe it wasn't people's favorite kind of grip tape. Jessup, never even heard of that brand. But Mob Grip makes some great skateboard tape, and you can cut out your own designs, put it all the way around the radio, do what you want, make it super grippy. Now, some final tips for this channel. If you're watching at this point, congratulations. You've probably learned a lot of really important basics that can help you throughout your time in the FPV hobby and probably for the rest of your life. I wish that someone had taught me these things when I was getting into RC airplanes, quads, or RC helis. I'm addicted to RC and I'm dedicated to it now for over 10 years, and I just love passing this knowledge forward that, you know, some of the older guys gave me at the field when I was younger. So I appreciate all of that knowledge, and I want to take a moment to say thank you to all of them. Now, some of the final topics we're going to talk about today, you know, are batteries. One of the things that people ask me a lot on the channel is, should I fly a Li-on? Should I fly a LiPo? And what are the differences between a Li-on and a LiPo? It's pretty simple. Li-on is the battery that you see on the left. That is the Lumineer Nav 3000 milliamp Li-on pack. They share a similar voltage, but each of these packs are very different animals. Now, the LiPo battery on the right is a 6S 1300 milliamp battery, and most people are flying LiPos for flying FPV racing and FPV freestyle. The battery on the left, the Li-on, is mostly specifically for long-range application drones, FPV planes and gliders, and FPV wings. Now, that's one of the reasons we fly those batteries, is because they need a low amp draw on Li-ons. So if you have a low amp draw setup, a low kV on your motors, it's not a super high kV, then you can fly a Li-on on it. Now, you have to kind of test that on the drone that you're flying to see if that Li-on's actually going to work on your quad. I've had similar power systems where I thought, well, this quad works on a Li-on and this quad should work on a Li-on. And then when I tried the Li-on on the other quad, it doesn't really work out. And you'll know because the quad won't really take off and fly very far. Now, if you have a low kV motor, something like it's a lot of times 6S rated motor, if it's under 2000 kV, the Li-on pack on the left, as you see, is gonna give you that longest flight time. And a lot of these quads are advertised to be a long range type of drone. So if you see a quad that's advertised to be a long range drone, or an LR drone as we call them, that is a quad that you can most likely try out a Li-on on. You can also fly a LiPo on a long range drone. So I have my 7-inch quads hanging back there on the wall. You can see them on the left. Those are my coveted 7 and 7.5 inch quads from Geprc, the Moz 7 and the Crocodile 75 V3. I love those quads. Both of those can fly on both of these types of batteries. You will fly mostly a 6S 8000 milliamp pack. That's about the average pack that you're going to fly on these big 7 and 7.5 inch quads, and 8-inch and 10-inch quads can also handle those types of packs. 8000 milliamps a lot. It's going to get you up to about 30 minutes flight time. Now, if you're flying something like the Nazgul Evoque what you see on the bench here in front of you. This one can fly on a LiPo, but it's not going to be flying on something like a Lion. You're not going to fly a Lion on an FPV freestyle drone. So very important that you not try to fly a Lion on a high amp draw type of quad. Now the reason I say high amp draw on here is because that even though these are low kV motors, they're still above 2000 kV. They are meant for 6S, but a Lion will get destroyed on an FPV freestyle drone. So that's very critical that you do that. So I want to say, congratulations again if you made it to the end of this video, and hopefully this simple knowledge and things that I wish that people had told me helped you going forward in your passion for the FPV hobby. If you enjoy drone camps, please do subscribe, become my Patreon, and I will bring you more tips and tricks right here on the channel and reviews on Drone Camps RC. Take care, guys, and I'll see you on the next one.